So, Gary, I think that one thing that probably a lot of people don't recognize is that the VII Foundation was set up at exactly the same time you and Ron, Haviv, and others set up VII Photo back in 2001. Talk a little bit about why the foundation was set up at that time and what you were hoping to achieve back in 2001. And while you do that, I'm going to bring up an historic photo of the VII photographers who were there at the beginning.
Sure. I think, when we set up the agency, we knew that, the world that we've been working in was changing really rapidly. This was at the beginning of digital technology. So the first digital cameras were starting to emerge at that time. And, the whole agency world was changing. The small agencies like the one most of us were represented by, Saba, were being taken over by larger agencies, in our case, by Bill Gates, Corbis, and others by Getty. So the whole landscape was changing, and we knew that we needed to build a new structure that worked for us at that time, and we knew we needed an agency to do that, and we knew that with digital technology we were able to do that without too much expense. We didn't need filing cabinets and big spaces with lots of staff, and the foundation idea really came about from watching Gilles Perez, frankly, in Bosnia and Kosovo work with the Fondation de France and use those non-profit structures to raise money to work in ways that, he couldn't really use to work, he couldn't really use the press for, so to work on meta projects. And we thought, well, if we can establish a non-profit ourselves, at some point we will figure out how to use it to fund the kinds of ambitious projects that many of us wanted to work on, that the media that we work for simply wouldn't go for. So that was really it in the beginning, and it's evolved in ways subsequently that we couldn't have imagined at the time.
Yeah. What have been the major changes in the kind of contemporary landscape of visual journalism that you've seen from setting up at the foundation in 2001 to the present? Because it was quite prescient to talk about looking for new sources of funding back in 2001. I mean, that is pre-iPhone, pre-Facebook, pre-social media, etc. But of course, that has all transformed the landscape now. But how would you sort of characterize the contemporary landscape, and what have been the major changes since the foundation was established?
Well, I mean, 2 or 3 years or 4 or 5 years before VII was created, I was still shipping slide film out of the Balkans by horseback to be picked up by drivers and then put on planes and shipped to New York or Paris. So, the world then was very, very different for us. The biggest differences, I think, were that we were not involved in any business practice really, other than having a relationship with 1 or 2 significant magazines, publishers, and having a relationship with an agency who represented you to the press worldwide. So, the agencies were strictly business to business. So photographers, generally speaking, not in every case, but generally speaking, weren't brands themselves. I'm talking about photojournalists here, with the exception of a few people like James Nachtwey. But most of us, we didn't have a relationship with the public. We didn't need to have a relationship with the public. Most of our business was conducted through agencies. So that was a very significant difference. And the resources, the access to the means of production were significant. We didn't have limitless money, but we could go on assignment for long periods of time. We had the financial resources to fund, very extravagant stories, to stay in war zones, for example, for weeks and weeks on end, and to do what we needed to do. So, I think that the two biggest differences for us were that, we had the means of production, and we had, somebody basically representing us and selling our work. I think one of the biggest differences writ large from today also is that, photography, photojournalism was mainly conducted by, men and women from Europe and from the States, and a very small number of them, maybe 100, 150. And now that's obviously changed for the better.
Can you see on your screen the photo of the marine photo?
Yes, I can. Yeah, 2003.
So you selected this when we were putting this event together, and you said to me that it was a good illustration because you were under contract at the time. So tell us a little bit about kind of the working circumstances and conditions that you had at the time when you went to Iraq.
Sure. So I was really, really fortunate. I had a contract with Newsweek magazine, and the original members of VII, the seven, original founding members, I think 5 of us out of 7 had contracts either with Newsweek or with Time magazine, which gave us not only financial stability personally, of course, but it gave us the means of production. It meant that there was a steady flow of assignment work coming through that the agency could sell. And the 2 members who didn't have contracts, Alexandra and Antonine, had incredible relationships with magazines. So, they were constantly working. So, here I went on this story. I think I spent maybe a month in Kuwait or 6 weeks preparing for this war, which meant renting a car, stocking it up with everything I needed. And then when the war started, when the invasion started, I had everything I needed. I was in situ, and I knew that I could cover this war for, as long as Newsweek and I, felt that was a good thing. So, in that case, in my case, I think it was 6 weeks for the initial part of the invasion before I went home. So, and also I was just thinking about this before the call, David. My satellite phone bill on this story was, I think this was my second highest ever satellite phone bill, the highest being in Afghanistan, but this was $20-something thousand.
Wow.
Sat phone bill alone. And because that's what I used to transmit my work. And also I allowed the Marines to make some calls home to relationships so that I could, build a stronger relationship with them and be able to work more fluidly. And in fact, at one point we're, moving up the road in a combat situation, and the guy at the front was urging his colleagues to make sure that I was safe because I was the guy with the phone. But I had all these resources, and I knew if anything went wrong, Newsweek would get me out. So it was a pretty privileged, it was an extraordinarily privileged situation to be in. Actually, it was incredible. So the support that you got from the media was unimaginable in today's context, unless you're working for AP, Reuters, New York Times, maybe.
When did you decide to transition from being a working photojournalist in the field, as it were, to running the foundation, and what was kind of the driving thought behind that?
Well, you don't know this, but it was that day.
Oh, really?
So precisely then, actually.
Wow.
Yes, maybe 2 or 3 hours after that photograph was
Right.
is when I decided not that I didn't want to do this anymore for a variety of reasons that maybe we don't get into here, but largely because I think the work wasn't being used in the way that I wanted it to be used. And so I sort of felt that my contract with the people I was photographing, whether they were Iraqi civilians or the US Marines, was broken to some extent. And the level of violence was extreme. So it was that day that I decided I didn't want to work as an active photojournalist for much longer. But in fact, it took me another 6 years to transition and find another means, and that came through being offered a fellowship, a Nieman Fellowship at Harvard, which gave me the space to rethink, and gave me new skills. I learned a lot of new skills at Harvard and then at Tufts University, where I went on to teach afterwards, and where I was able to develop a lot of the teaching practice that we've put in place here at the VII Foundation with our education programs.
So coming out of that Nieman Fellowship, how did you think about the core mission and the purpose of the VII Foundation? What did you want to have as the defining features and characteristics of the foundation?
So they haven't really changed very much. Ron and I, were both, Ron and I were the main drivers of the foundation. Ron and I were both committed to, long form storytelling. So, sort of the kind of meta projects that you've seen us do, whether that's, Imagine Reflections on Peace, the Millennium Villages project, for example. But we wanted to work on these sort of big storytelling projects, which also had an educational component where there would be some messaging, where we build curriculums. And we like to think of it really as in the old days, the exhibition or the book would be the destination of the work or the publication. And with the foundation, those things are really now the departure point. It's where we start the dialogue with the public. So that was always a big part of what we wanted to do. And then the two other spaces that we still occupy are education and training.
Yeah.
And the VII Foundation now, through its academy, has created sort of a very structured form of education. But the VII Agency was the first media organization of any kind that had a pretty formal mentoring program, which we started to early on, to identify young photographers who had massive amounts of talent, but needed really the kind of mentoring that Ron and I had when we were younger photographers, from senior photographers, some polishing up, sort of learning some of the field craft, and learning really what it took to run a small business operation, honestly. Yeah. And we recognized through doing that at VII that most of the people applying and who we were taking on looked like us. They were Europeans and Americans, and we knew that we wanted to bring in new perspectives. We wanted to work with young photographers from the majority world, especially. So we were able to build a program to do that through the academy. And then we also, what we call sort of media advocacy, we also wanted to address, issues that were important to particularly visual journalists, and use our platform, use our voice, to engage in a dialogue with the rest of the world about that.
Yeah. So as one of the illustrations for that, you mentioned Imagine, the big project Reflections on Peace. I mean, what we're seeing here on the screen are some images from that, but importantly, and I think this ties into the sense that you were conveying about going beyond book and exhibition, this is a supplement from Oslo Bijenya, which is one of the major newspapers in Sarajevo in Bosnia, a multi-page supplement covering that. So it was getting that material out in countries that have post-conflict societies, and partnering with media organizations of that. So just want to underscore that point. And just as a side point, because you mentioned...
I can't see that picture, David, actually, on the screen. Yeah. I don't have that picture on my screen, but...
Oh, okay. I'm having some problems with the screen share, so I will try again in a second. But while I look at that, you mentioned VII Photo and VII Agency. Last year, the foundation acquired VII Photo. I'm not sure many people understood in the general photo world what that meant and what that involved for the photographers. Say a little bit about why that acquisition took place and what the effect of that is.
Sure. So the VII Foundation, the Academy, and the agency all shared this name, VII, but they were in fact separate things. Yeah. And that was confusing. So we were always looking for a way to try and sort of simplify the structure, to be honest with you. But one is an LLC and the other's a non-profit. So that was complex. But what enabled us to arrive at that place really is just one of the fundamental changes in this industry that I'm sure everybody on this call will be familiar with if they're working as photographers, which is the business of being an agency has fundamentally changed. And, when VII started, I think more than 90% of its revenue came from working with the press. And up until sort of last year, that had changed, and about 10% of VII's revenue came from working with the press.
Yeah, incredible.
And a lot of the revenue, most of the revenue came from working with supra-governmental organizations, NGOs, etc. So the business of representation had changed, the revenue had changed. And so running an agency wasn't particularly viable, and the financial burden was on the photographers. So we changed, the way that VII worked, and now it's part of the nonprofit. It doesn't engage in any for-profit activities. It doesn't engage in a relationship with the press. The photographers all manage that, and the photographers from VII are now contributing photographers to the foundation, and they work on big projects with the Global Fund, with UNICEF, and with other nonprofit partners.
Yeah.
And are obviously, fundamental to a lot of the teaching that we do, and engaged in most of our projects.
Can you see the Oslo, Virginia page?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have this great relationship with the Bosnian newspaper. In Bosnia, Bosnia we have a bureau in Bosnia. It's where most of the original members of VII met in Bosnia. Many of us met in Bosnia when we were covering the wars. So we're very committed to that part of the world. And it's also a part of the world which needs a lot of attention. And we do a lot of programming there, not always journalistic programming, but a lot of cultural programming, a lot of civics programming, for example, bringing communities together, especially working with young people, sort of on areas and in spaces where they can find things that they want to collaborate on, and find common values and common cause, rather than division. So we do an awful lot of work in Sarajevo. It's a fundamental part of our DNA. That's our office there.
Yeah, that's the VII Foundation in the center of Sarajevo itself. As you say, it came out from that historic coverage and recording of the war itself, and Zia, who's now the director of VII Photo, of course, works from there, does teaching, etc. The other location that we have, which is where you are now, is Arles in the south of France. Beautiful location there on the river. The red door is the VII Foundation building from there, which you can see close up there, and some of the activities inside. Explain a little bit about why Arles was selected as a location, and what you think the benefits are of that.
Sure. We wanted a sort of a headquarters, a base that was pretty central geographically for us. And so Europe seemed to be a good space that would enable us to work in Africa, Middle East, and Latin America, South Asia, Southeast Asia. And indeed in parts of Europe as well, in the United States. But Arles we chose because you have, the world's largest, I think, oldest photo festival here, the Rencontre d'Arles, which is just a few weeks ahead of us. It's in the first week of July. That's a massive event. You have a huge convergence of photographers, editors, gallerists, curators, and the public coming here. You have France's National School of Photography based here, École Nationale de Photographie, and then you have two book publishers. You have Luma, I think probably the world's largest foundation with a private collection of photography, and many other foundations as well. But you have this sort of, in this small town, which is only 2.5 hours away from Paris by train, and a short flight to anywhere in Europe, you have this sort of epicenter really of photographic life in France. And France is a country where photography is and always has been highly valued. And so, we thought this would be a great place to be. It would be a great place for our students to come and to network, to, engage with photographers from all over the world. And as the emphasis here isn't strictly photojournalism, and our emphasis is, it's also a beautiful place for our young alumni and students to come and see and be exposed to a very different kind of work, very high level work.
So one set of activities coming up for the foundation is around exhibitions and talks and so on at the Rencontre Festival itself, first week of July, particularly the Monumental exhibition,
Yep.
which showcases a story by Zia Gavic and a story by Thomas van Utrecht,
Yep.
which opened in Sarajevo. Tell us a little bit about that exhibition and the other activities that the foundation is running in the Rencontre Festival.
Yeah, so Thomas and Zia both photographed Notre Dame. Thomas photographed the rebuilding of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris after it burned down. And Zia was given incredibly rare access. Thomas was one of only 3 photographers, I think, who had access to Notre Dame during the rebuild. And Zia was given very rare access to Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. So, you know, we have these sort of pretty unique sets of photography, but the show really gives us the opportunity to talk about, you know, the visual representation of these spaces, the politicization of spaces. So it's a way for us to talk about politics and culture and all kinds of other things going on in these 2 societies and society writ large, in a sort of in a perhaps less direct way than VII would normally.
Yeah.
So this isn't sort of vernacular journalism, but it's a touchstone, and it enables us to engage in all kinds of conversations. And you know, some of those conversations will take place during the Rencontre. I think we've got a panel that you're hosting on VII Insider.
Yeah.
Risk and journalism safety, which is obviously incredibly apparent now, both in Gaza, of course, and in Ukraine. We have a panel, I think, on artifice in the media, AI, and we've got Double Dummies, a partner that we work with here in Arles. We're lending them the space to have a dialogue with Palestinian photographers. And I think we've got James Natway, one of the original founding members of VII, is coming here for the first time to give a public talk. So all of that will take place inside the Monumental exhibition.
Yeah. And those 3 panels on AI, journalism, risk and safety, and then the one doing a critical analysis of Monumental on politics and so on, they will all be live streamed on VII Insider. People can go to the events page, register to participate online, so people will see them in person and online. And Monumental opened in Sarajevo in April. So these are some photos actually from the opening in the National Museum of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Say a little bit about the relationship with the National Museum, because, you know, we had the extract from Oslo Virginia. It seems like there are a lot of connections with major institutions in Bosnia.
Yeah, I think because we're all now of a certain age and have worked in Bosnia for a very long time, since the war, we have built relationships with individuals and with institutions there that it would be quite difficult, frankly, to build elsewhere. And, you know, we're now able to collaborate with a lot of those institutions and produce this programming in a post-conflict society. So this is perhaps a lesson for some of the younger photographers on the panel. You know, it used to be that when I started my career, you'd go off, you'd photograph whatever it was you were assigned to photograph, and then you'd move on to the next story. But what a lot of us at VII have done, and a lot of photographers elsewhere as well, is sort of maintain these relationships and contacts that you build in countries that you visit frequently. And by doing that, we have allowed ourselves and our friends who run these institutions to collaborate. We've created a space for collaboration, which is mutually beneficial. But it enables us to have a very big impact here. So by collaborating with national institutions, in this case, you know, the National Museum, you know, you've got your work addressing some very serious issues on the walls of a national institution where you have tens of thousands of guests walking through. Invariably, whatever is hosted by the National Museum makes its way onto local television, into local press, etc. So we're able to work in a way in Bosnia that now that we were not able to work or contemplate working 20 years ago when this sort of story all started for us. And I think it's really important to develop those relationships, to maintain relationships, nurture those relationships. And build partnerships. I mean, like the one we have with Photo Weeks that enables this, so it's, we used to work in isolation as lone, photographers. And now we don't do anything in isolation. Everything we do is collaborative, absolutely everything. And the best projects, are the most collaborative.
Yeah. Yes, and that collaboration in Sarajevo and Bosnia is going to continue. We will have news over the summer about a master's program in visual journalism that we're going to deploy and start September 2025, which is a partnership with the Faculty of Political Sciences at the University of Sarajevo, both a 1-year and a 2-year program. So I'm very excited about that because I think that we will be able to have an education portfolio that runs from the Foundry workshop through our 3 levels mentor program all the way to a full master's degree. And Sarajevo is, a fantastic place to do that, and we've got good partners at the university for that.
Yeah,
also worth pointing. Go on through.
It's it's super exciting, right? Who imagined in 2001 when we created VII that we would be collaborating with a very significant political science department at the University of Sarajevo to create a master's degree, in visual journalism and poli-sci. It's a remarkable evolution.
So at the same time that the monumental exhibition opened in Sarajevo, we actually had 2 other exhibitions. Zia and the team in Sarajevo were pretty busy putting that together. Yeah. One was See Through the Noise, which first showed in Arles last year when the foundation opened the campus here. And that was at the Sarajevo Memorial Center, which was, a fantastic display and construction there. There's Zia top left opening that exhibition in April. And this included a couple of well-known photographs from the VII photographers. And Ilvi had an exhibition of her Born Free project in a private gallery in Sarajevo. So for a week there were, well, actually a little bit longer than a week, there were 3 major shows up from the foundation there.
Really beautiful. It's great to see Born Free there because, of course, the Born Free generation in South Africa has a lot in common with the young generation in Sarajevo, right, in Bosnia, who were born after the war. And so what we're able to do in Sarajevo, what we love doing in Sarajevo, is rather than looking backwards, which I think a lot of us have a tendency to a reflex to do, we're able to look forwards, and you can bring work to Sarajevo, which addresses a lot of the issues and concerns and problems, frankly, that are prevalent and very obvious in the Balkans. Yeah. But these are problems that other countries are wrangling with too, and other communities and other societies are wrangling with too. And so it just enables that conversation to start. And it also, by using other countries, it shows the Bosnians that they're not alone confronting these difficulties and these issues. Yeah. We've had fashion shows here in Sarajevo, which is fantastic. You turn up and see mothers and fathers with their young children all dressed up, taking selfies in front of Dolce and Gabbana photographs, and that again is another way of sort of just normalizing things, actually bringing normative culture to Bosnia and moving away a little bit from the violence and war that most or many cultural experiences in Sarajevo seem to be.
Yeah. So we're getting towards the end of our time. We will have time for questions. If people have questions, I'll have a look at the Q&A box in a second, and we'll get to those. But we do have an offer for people on the call, because some of the VII photographers are running workshops just before the Rencontre week. And you can go on the VII Foundation website to see the available workshops. And if you're interested, then viewers on this call can get a 10% discount on those with that discount code Insider10ARL. Screenshot that now if you want, or email us later. We'll send you that information if you're interested in that. But there's more information on the website about those workshops. Let me just stop that and see. We have some questions for you. So Ted is asking, as I recall, and I may be wrong, but VII Insider came about during the pandemic lockdown in a desire to continue dialogue, education, and guidance to photographers around the globe. Would VII and the foundation have grown as it did without the pandemic? Perhaps I'm grasping for the proverbial silver cloud in the pandemic fallout. Just curious.
Oh, good question. I think it would have grown differently, actually. But I think the pandemic did create opportunities for us to engage with people online in a way that, you know, might have taken us a lot longer to figure out, particularly our teaching. So, you know, obviously we couldn't teach person to person during the pandemic. And so we developed very quickly an online education program that has enabled us to teach now, I think, I don't know the number, David, it's over 1,000 young
more than 1,000,
in 10 languages. And I know that we would not have done that. And they come from over, 100 countries. So I'm pretty certain that we would not have been able to achieve that. So yes, I think that the pandemic really, it made us, think that necessity is the mother of invention, right? So that really forced us to look at what we were doing and figure out how to do it under those circumstances.
Yeah. A question from an anonymous attendee about rights for images when the contributing photographers are working for the foundation. Do the photographers retain the rights to their images when working for the foundation when the job is funded by an NGO or a government or an external sponsor?
So if the photographers are working on a foundation project, yes, absolutely, they keep their rights. If they're working with for an NGO or a sponsor or a government, that can depend on the nature of the contract. But generally, yes, they do. But they usually as with the media, actually, the NGO, the sponsor, or the government will also have rights to use that imagery as well. But photographers very, very rarely give up the rights, and if they do, they would be remunerated appropriately. Yeah.
Another question from another anonymous attendee, maybe the same person. How does working for a non-profit differ to working with a for-profit agency as a photographer?
Well, the fundamental difference is that with the non-profit, the non-profit foundation doesn't represent the photographers to the press. So we don't represent their sort of for-profit work, if you like. They either do that by themselves, or in the case of many VII photographers, they do that with, another agency. I think they're mostly with Redux. But so we can't get engaged in negotiating with them for their for-profit work. So that's the fundamental difference. But in other respects, that's the major change, and we don't sell our archives. So it's a big difference. Yeah.
So one final question, which takes us back to the beginning and the photo you showed from Iraq, from Young-Soo Kim. She says, I know you showed a picture from the battle for Diyala Bridge and told us a bit about it. Can you tell us more about your experience regarding the battle? Did Newsweek publish any photographs that showed casualties of the US military from the battle?
No, they didn't. And the reason they gave at the time was that those photographs, if I'm not mistaken, were taken on a Friday, Saturday, so the end of the week, end of deadline time for Newsweek. And they said that the following week the story had moved on. At this point, at that point, the Marines had moved into Baghdad and had taken Baghdad. But one of my frustrations was that I felt that Newsweek did not want to show the American public the price that the Iraqis and their own soldiers and Marines were paying for that war. And they weren't alone in that. But I think that until Seymour Hersh really published his work from Abu Ghraib, I think that the US media did not distinguish itself in its coverage of Iraq.
Yeah. Do you think that has changed at all? I mean, we're coming towards the end of our time. We could discuss this for a long time, but as a final kind of question, picking up on that, do you think that media coverage of conflict, how many graphic images they rely on, has that changed at all since you set up the foundation to the current period? Or do you think it's just been consistently less than
That's a
one would
great
expect?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think the media is averse to publishing graphic images, but I think it's generally averse to publishing graphic images of the destruction its own army wreaks,
right,
and casualties on its own side. So, publishing graphic pictures of other people's pain and suffering is a lot easier for them generally. That's not surprising, but that is the case. And I think, to see a lot of, to sort of truly understand what's going on, you need to look beyond, images in the press.
Yeah.
I think, the press can do a really good job at covering a conflict for sure. But it's pretty incomplete, I would say. It's pretty disappointing. And also, to be fair, if you look at Ukraine now as a perfect example, the Russian government have completely blocked any coverage of that side, and the Ukrainians control to an incredible degree what any journalist can cover from their side. So you're getting a very sort of controlled, structured view of the world, where of that conflict. It's very, very, very well managed.
Yeah, indeed. Well, that does bring us to the end of our time. Gary, thanks so much. I think, we don't, as I said at the beginning, we don't talk about ourselves a lot, but I think it's good occasionally to give people an overview, particularly of the changes that have taken place and the activity that's coming for the foundation. And so we really appreciate your time doing that, and just thank everyone who came, who was in the audience. We appreciate your time as well. And if you're interested in the discount code, email us. We will send that to you, so that you can get a discount for the workshops during the first weekend of the Ron Contra Festival. And Gary, thank you very much.
Thank you, David. I mean, it's great to be here. Actually, I enjoy the dialogue, and I would encourage anyone, if you're in the vicinity, if you can make it down to Arles in a few weeks. Our partners, Photo Wings, will be here. I hope they don't mind me saying that, so you can connect with them. And a number of VII photographers will be here, and a lot of other people besides from the photographic community. So it'll be a pretty incredible week. So if you can come down, we'd love to see you. The door's open.
Yeah, thanks very much. We will see everyone next time.
Thank you.